Shall we head into the space? Start the walkabout? Yeah?
Amazing.
Thank you. I'll leave the water here. You don't know about the camera? Okay. Yeah, right? Crochet beanies, yeah. Come through. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming through to my walkabout. The show does close today, so Brenda gave me a nudge to say, listen, that walkabout, because as some of you know, most of you know, that I've taken on a new role that has consumed me, but I'm excited to talk through my work. And please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, comments, as I go through. You don't have to wait till the end. So, Disobedient Doilies. Wow, it's been quite a journey, quite an experience. And so this is a recreation of my mother's sitting room. It's not quite my mother's sitting room, but I was hoping to create an environment that you walked into and that was familiar but strange at the same time. So playing into notions of the uncanny and also looking into mimicry, because most of these themes I unpack at length in my dissertation. And so my aim was to create this environment, and those of you who are familiar with my master's body of work and subsequent paintings from that study, I worked a lot with doilies as well as shwe fabric. And so what I did is I continued, before embarking on this body of work and the study itself, I continued painting still lives that had objects which were nostalgic from or of my mother's home, because my mother insisted on creating an environment that was warm, that was comfortable, and she really, I think, took it upon herself to ensure that she was deemed and viewed as respectable, as a wife, as a mother as well. But at the core of my PhD work is the doily. So what happened is, in just thinking about what I could do for the PhD, I had to drop the shwe fabric, because I felt that as a Movenda/Zulu hybrid woman, I'd reach a dead end with the shwe fabric. And I had the opportunity and privilege of interacting with Juliet Lieb de Toy via conferences, and I just felt that she had done extensive, come through please. Hello, you can come through. And welcome. Yeah. And so I just felt that she'd done extensive work, and I felt that I needed to contribute meaningfully to knowledge as well. So I dropped the shwe fabric and focused on the doilies. So the doily, an ordinary, mundane, overlooked material that I'm sure all of us have interacted with in our homes, is something that stood out for me as a child, and something that stands out. I think it takes center stage in this exhibition. They're ordinary, they're so ordinary that they can become invisible. But in this exhibition, my focus was to ensure that they are visible and that we take note of them. And so I'd continued creating these still lives from and using objects from my immediate space, looking at objects that, for instance, my mom kept from her upbringing, whether it was paraffin lights and steel irons. I'd incorporate those. And when I finished my master's, I got married and I had children. My firstborn is a son. I'd incorporate toys from that he'd play with, and his hair cutter, because I'd, as his mother, assumed the role of being his hairdresser as well. And these are the things that I didn't understand, and I was like, I have to question this, because for me, something doesn't add up about being a good, virtuous wife and mother. Although I think I am, there are just certain practices that I don't want to subscribe to. And so before registering for my PhD, I looked at the works of South African artist, Cape Town-based Aline Bothma. Yeah. And so in her work, what she does is she creates these paintings where, and I think we look at similar themes. She's a mother, I'm a mother, and we were looking at how the doily is a warm fabric. It's something that creates that comfort. And we're both questioning our positionalities as women and mothers. And I just felt that as a painter, so some of you would ask, but why didn't you create paintings as a painter? I just thought that I didn't want to replicate what she was doing. And then I also looked at an international artist. Her name is Lindsay Arnold, who creates a series of paintings that she titles Dancing Doilies. And her paintings are quite intricate as well. And she plays and she looks at light and how the light hits the doilies and how the shadows cast shadow, how the objects or the light then cast shadows on the surfaces upon which they sit. And she employs the trompe l'oeil effect. So she paints up the masking tape that she uses quite beautifully. Hello. And so I think that notion of light has rubbed off on me, in the sense that in creating or in putting together the ceiling piece that hangs over our heads, with Mark Sinoff, when we were hanging, I was very specific in instructing him to make sure that we do have those cast shadows. So that's how her work influenced me. And then I obviously looked at a huge impact and a huge influence for the ceiling piece is another international artist. Her name is Ashley Blalock, and she creates these huge doilies that consume and take up gallery and outdoor spaces, and I think that's something that I've carried into this exhibition. And so during consultations with my supervisors at the start of the study, the concept of creating an installation was born, and that's where it emerged, to not paint rather, but to create an immersive environment. Any questions? No. Okay. So why I made this work? I've created the work primarily in response to restrictions that I've felt that I'm experiencing as a married wife or married woman, and the subtle insubordination that I practice, especially in my personal life as a magoti, a bride, or a mazrari in the Venda context. And after presenting a paper on Usha Sejaram's work, where I focused on her use of the broom, another mundane, overlooked, handmade object, I realized that it's in taking these mundane objects that one may reclaim power. And so I figured that this was something that I could take further. And in that paper, interestingly, I juxtaposed her work in relation to songs that are sung at weddings. Because I think that young brides are tricked. I've got a huge problem with wedding songs that are sung at weddings, because I think in them are these negative underlying messages about we're welcoming you into a family and this is something beautiful, but actually we're going to use you as a slave. And so there's umakotungo wetu, which means the bride is ours. Ours, not his. So you belong to the extended family. And fiela ngwanyana, which means sweep the yard girl. And you know, as an incoming makoti, you automatically get that job of having to sweep the yard. Just simply because you're new in the family, that's your job. and then you go up the ranks depending on how many years you stay in the family. Eventually, you're promoted to being the cook of the family. But I questioned those ideals, and I've had a difficult time, honestly, grappling with expectations, the expectations that the in-laws put on me. And shame my poor husband. I've questioned why I belong to his family, and that has altered the notion of family for me, whether immediate or distant. I'm constantly questioning why we do these things, and unfortunately, I don't do it loudly, so I ask him, and at some point he's lost for words and doesn't know whether he has to choose between myself and his family. But I draw on Black feminist theory that I think promotes the recording or documenting of Black womanhood and the lived experiences of Black women. And I do that, and Patricia Hill Collins, for instance, writes on that, and Bell Hooks. They speak of the importance of recording these narratives because history has denied women like my grandmother, who I actually feel this exhibition pays homage to, as well as my mother, women like them who their narratives were never recorded. And so as an academic and as taking on a practice-led study, I feel that my practice has allowed me to be able to explore and to make visible some of the things that they experienced that they would never be afforded the opportunity to. And so I'll just move to, and maybe if you want to come around with me, just to a shoe that I found actually in a secondhand store, this one in particular. This shoe is a shoe that is it's an exact copy, direct replica of the shoe that stood on my grandmother's windowsill on top of a doily. And I think this shoe is the one that made me ask my parents every single school holiday to visit grandma, because I had this fantasy that I would grow up and wear this shoe, right? But as naive as I was as a child, what happened is obviously I grew up and I outgrew the shoe. But it's that childhood memory for me that sparked the study. And most of the objects that you see here, what I did is I was very deliberate in my collection of the objects. Most of them are secondhand. And the reason for that is, while I've tried my best to recreate my mom's environment or sitting room, my mom, after I got married and after I finished my master's study, which was also based on the doilies and the objects that were in her home, she decided to switch her home up to more of a modern trend. And so she got rid of the room divider. So this is also a second-hand object. And she changed her couches. So only some of the objects that are in the space belong to her. And there are some untouched doilies that are in that cabinet, which I felt that I have to return to her, as well as the figurines. What I did is I didn't use a glue gun to attach the doilies because she wants them back. And, and so there was something in the collection of the objects that was quite sacred. My mom-in-law, actually, the room divider, she gave it away to my aunt in Venda. Somehow she felt that because she was in a different province, maybe a bit back, I don't know, she would appreciate it. But my aunt was like, bring it on, and with most of the objects. And so this then moved to Venda while my mom remained with a flat screen TV. She was moving with the trends and a stand. And with the couches, interestingly, my mother-in-law has the exact same couches. These couches were donated as part of a collaboration between UJ and a couple of artists who are here. I think Moira, who's just walked out, also contributed to the exhibition that we had. But my mom-in-law, because my husband has 6 siblings, in her sitting room, she needs to make sure that she fits all of us in. So it's my husband's brothers, their wives, their children, everyone's children, we fit into one large sitting room. And then there are different types of couches, and this is one of them. So what I did is I deliberately made sure that I did not ask her, because I felt that I didn't want to insult her or, to transform, because I knew what I was going to do with the objects. I opted to rather visit secondhand stores. And in my visits to these secondhand stores, I ensured that I then traced and tracked objects which I knew were familiar to me, that I resonated with. And interestingly, with visits to the secondhand stores, there are 3 in Melville, 1 down the road from me or up the road from me. The one guy who then noticed that I'd frequently visited ended up placing deliberately, and this is at the cat shop, he said, I deliberately placed these doilies outside, hoping that you'll drive by and come in. But as I mentioned at my exhibition opening, Gordon would make sure that, because he has this gallery across the road, he made sure that every time he popped in and saw doilies, he'd bring me a couple. And so it's been quite an interesting process. And for me, the collecting became part of the research. And I've written quite extensively about that in the dissertation. So I must mention that another influence in making and in looking at my work was British artist Michael Macmillan, who in 2026 was invited by VIAD on a residency, and he recreated his mother's front room. And so it was interesting for me that within and from different contexts, we could resonate, and we shared so many similarities because his mom was also interested in the respectability politics of, that are so present in the domestic space of the home. And so I worked with him, and he was one of my selected artists for the master's and is also for the PhD. But I worked with him, and he interviewed my selected homemakers. And I think that in my first iteration of this exhibition in 2023, where the room divider was actually not covered, I tried to recreate the space as obviously a way of tapping into my study. And while I'm standing here, I think I want to speak about the mimicry that's at play in the space. Because in selecting 33 Twickenham, this gallery, I looked at the fact that, and this is where I argue that this is actually a liminal space. It is the third space for me, because this is technically a house that has been transformed into office space and a gallery. But at the same time, the mimicry is then extended in the space in the sense that what you see on the wallpaper on the vinyl is actually the nostalgia, right? I've used the sepia tones as a way of recreating what I might never go back to, and that's what Boehm speaks about, this longing of something that was probably never there, but I know that it was there, and I'm reclaiming that. And then there's a play on the physical object, which will also never be put to its original use because I've shut the doors and I've freed the objects. And this is me actually saying to my mom, Mom, you said to me as a child, I should not touch these objects. If I did, I'm out. You brought me in, you'll take me out of the world. And so for me, in as much as this was much about creating the work for the PhD, it was more about play. And I think there were elements where, and there were moments where I thoroughly enjoyed being able to physically handle these, because until my wedding took place in 2011, we'd never used most of the objects that were housed in the room divider. And the room divider, for me, becomes a museum, because you're storing and preserving these objects, and you're not using them, and you're telling me you're keeping them for the pastor and church delegates and esteemed family members. So for this project, I just thought, I'm going to have fun. Let's free the objects, let's animate them. And actually, in a sense, I'm preventing my mom from continuing to practice these domestic chores that she consumed herself with almost every second week, because she's expecting some unknown visitor. And I'm thinking, okay, so that was the intention with this. And interestingly, I looked at Ibrahim Mahama's work quite a lot, and he covers these monumental buildings with jute sacks. And for me, what became interesting in his work and why I eventually decided to cover the room divider with the doilies is that he looks at how those sacks carry traces of trade and hard work. And for me, the doilies and the objects actually do carry traces. These traces are, in most cases, hidden, and in some cases, you can actually see them, whether they're stains. And I opted, obviously, not to wash the doilies, but to keep the memories that they possess and to have them come and imbue the space. And so that's where the influence of covering the room divider came. And it was interesting also in just speaking about a room divider. For me, it's something that I take for granted. I'm like, a room divider. In the Overwhelmed exhibition in 2023, the curator thought I would be bringing in something that resembled a Chinese kind of screen. And I had to explain that no, in the black township or in the black home or in the back room or in the garage, a room divider is exactly that. It divides the room so that you have, in the middle, you have the sitting room on the other side, or the bedroom, and on the other side is the kitchen, due to limited space. And so the room divider is a central point in this installation. And yeah, just in terms of the making, it was quite challenging because I had to think a lot about how to transform the space so that it doesn't look pretty. And in doing that, and I think in freeing or in allowing the objects to come out of the room divider almost to play, I then had to challenge myself to actually interact with the couches a bit more and to untangle what was happening, for instance, on the carpets. So I would then cut into the couches, remove the stuffing. So it became quite an immersed process. And I don't know if anyone has questions because, yeah, I think I will end my part of the walkabout here.
I have a question about the objects that's coming from the cupboard. Was there any sense making or meaning making in the way in which you collected them on each chair? Are there themes in that, or was it just an intuitive response?
Oh, thank you for that. In fact, what ended up happening is in grouping the objects, you'll see that on this couch we have more of the breakable objects, and on that couch, so I wasn't particularly looking at any themes. Most of it was intuitive, but eventually I had to decide that one thing, what happened on the one couch didn't necessarily have to happen on the other. And then obviously it was a difference in the kind of ways of attaching the objects. Some of the doilies, and in order for me to be able to move into these moments, I had to use the glue gun, but in certain instances I would stitch. And another interesting thing to mention maybe is that I insisted on not learning how to crochet because I felt that I would be falling back into the very stereotype that I'm critiquing. And so I did not crochet anything for this project. And in creating or in collecting the objects, what became interesting, and going back to that idea of traces, is that some of the objects had annotations under them, where one can obviously see that the owner, at some point, this object meant so much to them. And you'll see that there are price tags that you'd see around. I left those intentionally because the fact that something that meant so much to someone else has just been reduced to 10 rands or 95 rands. This doily in particular, I got for about 95 rands because it had a hole. And the owner of the shop said, oh, I actually shouldn't even be selling it to you. And I said, no, that's actually what I want. Give it to me because I will use it. And so I do speak about the depreciation of objects, or the devaluing of objects, but how someone else's trash can become someone else's treasure. And I think in that sentiment, these objects mean so much more to me. And I wasn't interested in the narratives that one could collect from their previous owners, because that would take my study into a different realm. So for me, it was about collecting them for however much they were, and finding a way of giving them a voice and giving them a platform in the installation.
Shuli, what does your mother think?
Ooh. My mom and a couple of other people who came to the opening and to view the work think, sure, okay, interesting. You've done some work. It's good. You know, this education of yours. And she's proud of me. I don't want to take that away. She is proud of me. She does think that, though, I didn't have to cover everything. To her, it's all destroyed. And but I think she's slowly understanding some of the underlying questions that I ask her as well, because I had to question her around why she was doing some of the things that she did. And I realized that in her case, it was also a coping mechanism to cope with the harsh realities of life and realities of marriage even. And so keeping herself busy for her made her content. And in a way, she does understand why I've done what I've done, because she got rid of all of this. And although there was someone else who visited and said, oh, she could have given this to me, hey? I would have put it to good use. Yeah, so that's my mom's comment. But yeah, they're varying responses to the exhibition, yeah.
Shani, did your mom actually crochet at all?
She did. So she would crochet. So she was taught, and I think this is something that I haven't really touched on in the dissertation. She was taught by her mother, my grandmother. And I think with completing my master's in my 20s, I have a footnote in my dissertation where I refer to my grandmother's crocheting abilities and the fact that she learned how to crochet from her boss. So my grandmother was a domestic worker. And so when speaking to my mom, and this is after the math, because my grandmother passed away in 1997, so I could not have interviewed her for this body of work. My mom says that my grandmother, and my mom is the firstborn, so she has a lot of the recollection of what happened to my mom. My grandmother learned to crochet at the age of 9. So I asked myself, why 9? How is it that someone lives with their employer at the age of 9? And recently, I think just before the exhibition opened, I sat down with my mom, and we were actually with her younger sister and my cousin sisters, and we wanted to find out more about our grandmother and why we don't have. So my grandmother is Zulu, Shabalala from KZN. But she has her home. So my mom's family home is in Middleland, Soweto. So I just tried to understand where's the link between KZN and Joburg? And she tells me that my mom was, her mom, my grandmother was physically abused by her mother, my great-grandmother. And her employer at the time, so it means that my great-grandmother was working as a domestic worker for that family. They'd often find her out in the veld. And so they made a decision to bring her from KZN up to Joburg. But that means that we've lost contact with that side of the family. And I think after this, I'm going to trace back my roots there. Although some people would say I shouldn't be going there, I should be going up north to my dad's side of the family. Anyway, story for another day. And so, yeah, my mom learned how to crochet via her mother. And she's been teaching my daughter how to crochet. And this piece,
skips a generation.
Skips a generation. And it's interesting because I think these young ones are learning how to crochet via YouTube shorts. And yeah, so we've got a stash of wool at home, and yeah, she's crocheting. Yeah. But I think she will definitely also subvert most of the notions that are embedded within the domestic space of the home. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Gordon.
Another one, if somebody else wants to ask. You once told us the story of your father and his tray and the doily, and I see him here.
Yes,
Tell
yes.
them the story, it's so lovely. Was that the tray I got?
Yes, so he recognizes it. My father was a traditional Venda man. He had istembu, so he had two wives. So my mom is Umfazwe Pepper, the one who got to sign at Home Affairs and the one who had the rights to the properties. And but he was still very much traditional and set in his ways. And so we would, until his death in 2015, we would serve him his food with a tray, a doily or something, cloth, and then you'd put the food on the tray and then take it to him. And as you get to him, you have to rosha as a Venda woman to show that subservience and respect. So that is what I'd have to do. And on occasional days, I'd then just take his plate, willy-nilly, and like, here we go, and then I'd just get the stare, like, how dare you, But yeah, and these are the things that I don't do that with my husband. I've opted not to. In fact, the food is in the microwave. If you're hungry, you'll go and get your food. Yeah.
Is there a doily in the microwave?
No doilies, interestingly, yeah.
Do you see any similarities between your use of kind of used object and Usha Sejarim's use of used objects?
Definitely. And I think that I wrote about her work intentionally because I found an affinity between our work. And in the article that I referred to at the start, I speak about the similarities between Indian women and what they experience, married Indian women, and what they experience in their families with their in-laws, as well as a Venda woman. So yes, definitely. Yeah. Any more questions? Good, Anju.
Good. I'm just wondering what the evolution of your mom is now, because I know doilies and the act of just collecting things and always being about something is almost like our mother's kind of way to, I think from my study, which is like trauma within the family, you find that most the mothers and the grandmothers are always busy with something, because almost like sitting still kind of like puts you in this awkward, moment of thinking about things, so you'd rather be, actually being active. So I want to know because you said now she's evolving in terms of the design. What does her, I'm not assuming that she hasn't dealt with any trauma or anything, but what is her evolution now? Like, if she is in the house, is she sitting, is she still finding something else? Yeah.
Watching TikTok.
No, she's not sitting. In fact, last year, my niece who lives with my mom found an image on Google Maps of her outside sweeping. So I guess, my mom does not sit. And so I think there's also that play on that idea that, because I thought shutting these doors would mean to her, stop occupying yourself with these chores. But I then realized that what I've done instead is I've actually not given her that place to rest, because I've made the couches resist rest. But no, the answer is she has not stopped working. There's always something. In fact, I got her a coloring book so that she could then doodle if she really feels. But no, for her and her generation, a woman can never be idle. You have to keep yourself busy, and I think she'll be busy until her dying days. Yeah.
But I think also the coloring book is also indicative of now she's busy with herself. Yes. Because all of us was busy with like serving others, which is usually our mothers, but coloring book is more of an inner. So I think that's beautiful.
And a way of healing, because I think the other thing about my mom and why I was never able to ask her why she did the things she did is because of that fear. There was always that boundary that she's your mom, you have to respect her. And so eventually, as an adult, I was able to sit her down and say, but why did you do all of these things? And I think as a parent, within the black culture, they aren't able to express what they go through, and I think she'll never be able to do that quite openly. But she then is able now to sit and say, now you know what it means or what it meant for me to have to make sure that I provide that warm environment and make sure that you guys feel comfortable. And in a way, I'm doing that, you know. So I think the other thing that I didn't mention is, for me, the doily is also a metaphor for me. It's not loud, I'm not loud, but I'm trying to create change and occupy spaces that perhaps I would have never been able to, but doing so very quietly through quiet insubordination. Yeah.
I found the comment about putting things in a cupboard and keeping it away, and it makes me think of my great-grandmother's tea service, which we actually still have, from 1868, where it was a kind of wedding gift and it gets put in the cupboard and it never gets used, just in case someone comes.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing, because like I said, until my sister's wedding in 2010 and mine afterwards, those tea sets, crystal glasses, cherry glasses, the small ones, things that I just sit and say, come on, just let me play with them. I'm having a tea party here, you know. I'd never be able to use them. And it's only in those years, 2010 and 2011, my mom realized, why have I kept these things locked away for so long? Come, let's start using them. And unfortunately, by then it was too late, because her only 2 daughters actually were getting married and leaving her. So, yeah, very interesting.
Just one question. You told us what your mother brought to this exhibition. I'm just interested to hear what your daughter brought of it, because she crochets as well.
She crochets as well, and she'd spend time with me in the studio, both she and my son. Oh, she loves it. And when I couldn't work in the studio for obvious reasons, having to be there to watch them and take care of them, I'd take some of the smaller objects home to work on them, and she'd offer to help. She loves the work, and I think, unfortunately, with having to occupy so many positions in life, being a daughter, a wife, a mother, a working wife, mother, I think the PhD has taken away from them, and they've had to sacrifice as my children, because I've had to say to them, I can't spend time with you, I can't be with you because the PhD, you know. So for them, every time the sentences would end with the PhD. And so for her coming, and I think my family in general, for them coming and seeing this as the final installation and what I've been working towards. She was actually quite emotional. People who were here would have seen her. She loves it, and I think she appreciates the fact that she was part of the process, and I at some point she wanted to crochet more, but then I just thought I didn't want that aspect to feature predominantly in the exhibition. But yeah, no, I think
There's a different kind of crocheting, like in those little fancy shops now, with vests and bikinis.
Yes, and beanies.
Maybe also do that kind of crocheting.
I think so, yeah, because she's still learning as well. So she does like frivolous things, you know. She'll say she's making her friend a blanket, and then she gets tired, she stops, she moves on to something else. So, yeah. But thanks for that.
Shani, I have a question. This is fascinating. I must say, when I briefly saw the exhibition, my eye went straight to that dog, and I said, I know this dog. Why do I know this dog? Because I can see the patterns and the from your mom to my mom. I was making that connection. But I think I want to know because you said, you were very passionate about this because you wanted to break away from that kind of domestic role as a woman. and you specifically did not choose to do crocheting, perhaps for that reason as well. But your daughter is now going into that. And I think my question is, in a way, is it an act of, I won't use the word rebellion, okay, but is it an act of, because I find it quite interesting that you were kind of not prepared to, and didn't want to do the same things that your mum did. And I find myself in that very same position. So that's what I'm trying to ask. Well, I don't have a daughter to like skip a generation and somebody else. But do you think it's an act of rebellion? Because I often questioned it. Was there something that triggered me to make that choice? Or I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
I think it is, and I think my cues, obviously in the title of the exhibition and the study itself, Disobedient Doilies,
Yes.
they are exactly that. And to be honest with you, I am disobeying certain cultural norms to the point where my husband is sometimes just beside himself, because I will ask him genuine questions, and if he can't answer me, I often then choose not to go, for instance, to a family function. And what that does is it places huge shame and embarrassment on him, because your wife is deliberately disobeying the family because she's not coming to, to come and cook and join the other women in the activities of the day. So yes, that's exactly what it is. But for me, I think it's a subtle disobedience. It's definitely, it's quiet. I don't do
I think
it.
you summed that up in your artist statement, quiet insubordination.
Yeah.
So I love that term.
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is, because when I started the study, my springboard was the idea of respectability, or the concept of respectability politics. And a question that my supervisor asked at the time was, surely not all the women in Soweto use doilies. So that means that they were assuming a position of, being disrespectful. And that's where I did some reading, and it's Margot Daisy actually who speaks of this quiet insubordination, and then coined the term disrespectability politics that I have used quite a lot in the writing, and that I unpack. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
All right, if there aren't any more questions, thank you so much for coming.
Shani, that was so enlightening and so fabulous. The show is fabulous,
Thank
and
you.
hearing you speak about it is just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you.
Passion.
Yeah.
Where are the works going now? You can't just
Oh, the
quietly
work.
store them somewhere.
Actually,
Not in
someone.
my studio. We've been
Soon.
sharing a studio at the moment.
Yes. The work travels to UP. There's a conference, and someone who came to see the show actually asked me to have a second iteration in that space, and it would be a talking point for their conference. So it goes to UP. Now, in fact, in the next 2 weeks, the conference is in September, and then we'll see from there what happens.
Sure.
But
these
yeah.
These will probably go back to the owners of the couches who will have them on permanent display.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your factory, yeah.
Yeah, but I think as a continuation for me, because I didn't paint for the PhD, I will then create paintings in response to the installation.
Yes, you hope so.
Yes, ooh, yeah, yes, huge hopes. But
Have
yeah.
you documented it to paint it properly?
Yes, it's well documented. Thanks, Caitlin.
Because
Yeah, no, it's been well
And she can
documented.
paint properly too.
Yeah, in
you
fact,
see those really paintings.
yeah, we also have a 3D scan of the room. So when I get my website up and running, I'll have the link for you to come in anytime you want to. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.